All right, guys. Well, first of all, thank you everyone for joining. So the whole point of this is to just go over ECS and what it's all about. What is ECS? uFrame ECS is kind of like a new development paradigm within the uFrame family of products. So as you can see, there's Architect, ECS, and MVVM. All of these products are based on different development methodologies. But we're going to talk more specifically about ECS in general. So one of the main ideas behind this is to widen our range of market, not only to developers, but people that don't know how to code as well, while still encapsulating the whole idea of good architecture as well, and making sure that everyone can be happy with the solution, and you can have very strong developers work with people who know nothing at all. Whereas with MVVM, it's been a challenge to get people that aren't as familiar with those patterns to learn how to use them and learn how to use them effectively. So ECS is kind of our goal to kind of bridge that gap a little bit. So what I've done here is I've created a very basic example, and I do want to say that this is just a very preview version of the product. So this should be released by the end of the week, so you can play around with it, and it's mostly to get feedback from the community and everyone that wants to join in as this is being developed. So you will be able to download it, so that'll be fun. So I'm going to give a brief overview because right now there isn't going to be any documentation while it's still growing and things like that over the next month or two before it's actually a full production release ready to go, and at the point where it's supported, you'll kind of have an idea of how to play around with it, or if nothing else, just kind of learn what this is and how it works. So if you'll give me just a few seconds, I'm going to grab some water. All right, so I've got a list of things to go through here. We're going to kind of talk about the components, entity groups, systems, how you communicate between other systems, kind of how it pulls in the idea of visual scripting, and some of the future things that are going on, as well as the API. And if at any point you have any questions, feel free to ask. I might miss it and come back to it, but I promise I'll try my best to get all the questions moving forward. All right, so the first thing I want to talk about is components. So what is a component? We all know exactly what this guy is. He's nothing more than a simple Unity mono behavior. So if I actually go to my clouds here, you can see that my scroller is directly represented over here as a component. Nothing more, nothing less. And in ECS, these components are basically just data. There's no behavior or anything attached to them. So, all right, we'll move on from there. These components are, a very strong part of how you create state in your application or game. And it's very important to keep these as very strictly, primitive data and keeping the behavior out of it. So next, I'm going to switch over here and click on a system. We'll talk about systems in a second, and I want to explain what entity group is. So right here we have an entity group called flapping birds. And basically what I'm doing is all of the entities or game objects, if you want to think of them that way, there's a difference, but we'll talk about that later. For the most part, it's kind of the same idea. So for every entity that has the bird component and the flapping component, it's going to trigger a handler. And we'll go into these handlers a bit more later. The key thing to note about entity groups is that it's a reactive way of grouping components so that at runtime you don't have to query these. So you could effectively run this group in an update loop without any performance hits or having to do any checking, querying all of the components. It's kind of already just maintaining this list, as your entities gain components or components get removed. So I'll always have a running list of all the components that have bird and flapping. So I'm hoping that explains what an entity group is. It might make a little bit more sense in a minute. So now we can kind of talk about systems. So systems are a group of event handlers, if you will, where they kind of have a specific set of components or a specific, responsibility of doing a specific task. Now, and the one I'm showing you here is a little bit big, so I'm going to switch over to my scroller system because it's much more simple, and this is probably a little bit more complex than what should be in one system, but I was running pretty fast trying to get this done, so you can hate on me later. But anyways, okay, systems. So every system allows you to define very specific events, and all of these events come in usually from Unity, where they might be events that you define specifically. So simply by double-clicking on my graph here, I can see a whole list of events. Most of these are Unity events, and even with the new GUI event system, I can subscribe to any of these events. So say, for instance, I want it on mouse down. I've now got a handler for on mouse down. Now here's the key thing that is needed when working with these events. It's not always the case, but in most cases, you want your event to be associated with some kind of a component. So in the case here of scroller, we only want to process the update within all the components that are of type scroller. So when I connect this, that means that, hey, for every scroller, run this piece of functionality. And in some scenarios, you might have more than one mapping. A perfect example is on collision enter. Let me see if I can find that. Okay, here we go. So on my on collision enter 2D, which I again just add from my list here, I can specify the entity that I want to process this on, as well as the component that we could potentially collide with. And then whenever this collision happens, or okay, we have a flapping bird, which is part of an entity group. This could just as easily be a component, as you see here. It could be an entity group or a component. I'm going to be able to execute based on these two different components. All right. Any questions so far? I don't know if this comment is, if I'm explaining it all right. Yes, component is a model behavior. Absolutely. And the whole idea of it is to use composition more than inheritance. So components you don't really inherit from each other. Yes, exactly. Entity is a composition of components which hold your data. So it makes it very easy to um, compose new types of objects or decompose them at runtime. Cool. So um, I'm going to also show you like how you can create your own events here. Yes, yes, it is like Playmaker, but it's not in the sense that um, it's actually building you a very nice architecture based on the ECS pattern. So from a developer standpoint, if you decide you want to write code, one of the features is you'll be able to right click on these handlers and say, you know, custom method, or even have a configuration where you just want to skip the whole visual scripting part completely. And it gives you a very nice API, just like uFrame MVVM does, and allows you to write the code yourself however you want to. So one more thing I'm going to show you is events. So I can define any kind of event right here. And that's kind of what this whole outer layer is for kind of defining your components and your events. These are kind of global to your modular application. And we'll go into what a module is later. But when I define this event, it actually generates some useful stuff for me to where I can actually add this toggle scrolling event here. So yeah, and another note on that for you guys asking the question about Playmaker is this actually generates the code for you. There's no black box, you know, runtime. This is real code as if a developer's, you know, writing, you know, ECS code himself. It's actually doing this for you. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and get rid of this before I forget. All right, back to where I was. Okay, so that's kind of how you can define events. You know, events are just classes that are easily signaled, and I'll show you how you can do that. So now is kind of the fun part. Since we're talking about Playmaker, we can go right into the whole visual scripting side of things. All right, so let's see if I've got to find one over here. My game system. So here is a little bit of visual scripting. Hopefully the developers aren't choking. But yeah, so this is the point. From this point on, you can say, hey, I want to do this in visual scripting, or I can say, hey, I'm going to do this in code, and it'll give you a nice method implementation to implement all this, and you get full access to, you know, everything. But basically what I'm doing here is I've created a component called spawn randomly. And what I want this component to do is kind of define more of a little bit of a gameplay functionality. So with this component, I've defined a couple, you know, properties on here that I want to be controlled. So my spawn randomly component is going to, whenever the start playing event happens, it's going to actually begin this sequence where right here I'm going into the interval, and this is going to start running, you know, a timer. You know, in each tick I'm going to do a spawn. So in this case, it could be whatever the pool name is, and I can just double click and I get all of the variables from the components that are input into this event. So if we go back and look at those one more time, you can see all the variables there, and I get those right here. I can include them and use all those. That's kind of how you define your variables. It's all coming from your components, because remember, those are the state. That's the data. Now I can create, you know, variables that are like temporary in here as well. I can create my vector 3s, integers, and stuff like that. But for the most part, I think it's best to go ahead and just expose it on the component. That way it can be saved, if it needs to be. So that brings me to kind of the next thing with this is, the whole way that these action systems works is, it's hard to provide access to all of the APIs out there and to do it for, everything that exists so that someone can easily use this. So if you're working in a team and you have developers, I've made it really, really easy to create your own custom actions, and I'll kind of show you how that works. So in here, I've got, there's two different ways you can create actions. One is to, you can create a class, and I've actually got a node for this as well, or you can create a static class with static functions. So it actually reads my method signature. I'm using standard types. There's no special float types. There's no crazy anything. You could actually use this library outside of uFrame ECS. So from these signatures, it realizes, hey, A and B is an input, and I'm accepting a action for yes or no. So in that case, I'm checking if A is less than B. We want to make sure that the, yes action is not null. So they've actually created a branch from there. Then we return true. If not, then we return no. So what we can do with this, and if we type in less than, we'll actually see I've got an actual node here where I've got the A and B for the input, which is just my parameters here. And then I got a yes and no, which gives me, a sequence that I can flow out of. So I could then, create another action. There's lots of different things you can do, but for now, that's kind of the basics of creating a static function library. There's a lot of different things you can do with these. I mean, it's just a static function, so not a whole lot to it. One of the other ways you can create actions is actually defining them in here. So for this Angry Flappers, I'll show you the actual game running in a second. I've created a custom action here where I've actually defined some inputs, outputs, and branches. So branches would be the, let me pull that, would be like this, yes or no. The outputs would be any kind of resulting variable, and you can specify those with out. So if I were to specify out right here, it would actually make it as a resulting variable that you can store within your context. So anyways, this flat bird right here, I created this one just because I did not want to visually script how to flap this bird. So what it actually did was create me a custom action called flat bird, and all I have to do is write the execute method. So I did a couple things here to, transform and do some nice Unity things for flapping the bird. And now, if I go into my bird system, and so for every flapping bird on the update, I just passed in the flat bird. I pulled in my bird variable and connected it to bird. So when I actually run this, it's going to actually execute this code every frame since I'm in the update event. So I'm going to run this game really quick. Just to show you that it does work. And I'm horrible at Angry Flappers. But anyways, and then when you hit play, you kind of like start over. But before I get too far on, just to continue on this, on the other side of this class where the partial is, find that really quick. Open. So here's my custom action, and you can do these without the editor as well, but basically all it is a class that you could again use without anything. The only dependency you have is on uFrame attributes, which will be open source, so anyone can include these attributes into whatever products are out there on the asset store or whatever, and give you some pre-built-in actions to work with their system, whether it be like UFPS or anything like that. And then we have an input, which is just an attribute defining that, hey, this is an input. We have the same for outputs and action branches. But you don't entirely have to worry about that if you do this. If you do this, all you have to worry about is just writing your execute method. So one of the other things that I forgot to mention was whenever you create an event here, what it'll do is it actually starts building you a library that actually exists in code. So let me go here to uFrame, and in my library, it starts building these actions for me that actually implement these features for you. So you can see here, it's I can do add spawn randomly, add Angry Flappers game. So it gives you components for like adding these components, publishing events that you've defined, all that kind of stuff. It makes it very easy to plug right in, use within the system or use without the system, the visual scripting, I mean. So one of the things that I do, just to show you that, is right here where I do begin scrolling, I'm actually publishing toggle scrolling. So if I type in publish, I can see all the different events that I've personally defined within my project, and I can publish those events. So in this case, when we start playing, we want to begin scrolling all of my scrollers. So I publish toggle scrolling, where this guy has defined them, this guy picks it up, and it actually sets the value on the component to scroll. And my moving direction just says if he is scrolling, movement over time. So that's the basic rundown of how it works and all that. I'll answer this question. Does this support refactoring, like renaming variables, etc.? For the most part, one thing that this is going to do a little bit differently than MVVM is it's not going to create you any editable files right off. We're going to go more the approach of on demand. You say, hey, I want to extend this component, right click on it and hit, customize, and it'll actually generate you a class from there. That way, I can effectively delete this modules folder and regenerate everything if I'm just using visual scripting, and kind of keep it separately. As far as like the components and stuff, there's no real need for refactoring, and that's one thing that we really wanted to avoid, especially with people that aren't going to be, developers or anything like that. We wanted to make sure that it was very easy for them to use the system without having to worry about, refactoring issues and things like that. So hopefully that explains that. Some of the power that can come from this is from third-party data APIs. If all of my components are defined within this system, we can dynamically generate the code to synchronize this to PlayFab or other third-party APIs. This part's not done yet. That'll come kind of later as we get some more feedback from everyone. But this really allows us to do a lot, and we could even have things to where this reset rotation on play. We could have right-click and choose sync variable over the network. Little things like that that allow you to really just focus on the core gameplay and have all this extra stuff, working with the cloud and saving user gameplay data and all that. the system really supports that idea where you don't have to worry about all that. And you really just focus purely on your game, how you want it to play, and all this other stuff just kind of comes along with it as you go. So it will be integrated with UNet. How quickly that'll come, I'm not sure, but that's definitely something we want to have very fast with the integration, and definitely for the release. And also, the one thing that's not here yet is step 3 debugging. So obviously, any visual tool like this where you have actions and things like that, you want to be able to step through all of your actions and be able to see the variables at the runtime, see the events, and kind of see the flow of your game executing. And that's something that we're going to be doing very quick. That's actually one of the next things on my list to get cracking on. So saving and loading is not in, but by the design of the system and the API, you can access all of the components that are running, and it's very easy to create on your own. And maybe in the future I'll go more into details of how easy that is. But one of the biggest problems with serialization, in other systems, is that you have to deal with inheritance and references to other components. With ECS, everything is just an integer ID in the way that it maintains and stores all this information in memory. So serialization is a non-issue. I mean, it'll be super fast and very easy to save and load state as well. So hopefully that answers that question as well. And one of the other things that we want to put a little bit more time into is, we've kind of got the idea of visual scripting and supporting non-developers, but we really want to focus on making sure that developers are very happy with the API as well. This generates a lot of nice code for you, and where you'll actually be inserting code, it's very readable code, and making sure you have all of the data information you need to actually do things appropriately. Yeah, there definitely will be a default implementation of saving and loading. Absolutely, that's part of the whole, PlayFab and all that integration that's currently on the site. Is that in an earlier prototype version of ECS, we actually already had this working because we were working on another game, but I can assure you, with about 100 lines of code, it's done. So there's no issue about, not this huge amount of different things that have to be solved or anything like that. So it's very easy to implement. All right, so I've kind of, one last thing. The other thing is one of the biggest requests that we had in the past with MVVM was polling, and that's one of the things that we wanted to provide support for directly off the bat. And I've got a prefab pool here where there'll be more features with this. This is very bare bones, just instantiation. And allows you to, create different pools that has multiple prefabs and however you want to set it up, and you'll be able to define how many can exist in this pool before, destroying another and creating a new one and things like that. And it's all a very simple setup as far as running inside of the game. So my kernel here, I added my ECS system loader in the kernel, and then each module that I create, like this module Angry Flappers here, it creates me a nice little class that will install the systems, does everything. So effectively with one little game object, you can have this whole system running to where all you have to do is go add the components on the objects that you want to. and you don't even have to reference component to component. That's another beauty of this system, is everything kind of works independently of each other and has a unique way of working with a component here and a component over there, and the way that it pulls information. So you don't have to, click and drag and do all this stuff. You just say, I want this to do this, and it does it. So basically, once you've kind of defined all this, anybody can go throw on some components and start defining entities that belong to the game. So it really gives level designers a lot of power. Garbage collection. That's one of the things that before the production release that, and what I mean by focusing on the API is making sure that we cross our T's and dot our I's with all of the garbage collection and performance. That's a huge thing. All this is great, but if it's not performant, then how good it is. I mean, you're already getting a lot of performance using this because it's generating the code for you, but still ultimately, you want to make sure that is running very fast and efficiently. Well, I think that's pretty much everything on my list, so I'll just switch over to questions now. If anybody has any more questions or anything. I mean, if you're interested in ECS, absolutely. That's the thing about the system is, from the high level, you're dealing with architecture up front anyways, no matter who you are. Now, the non-coder isn't going to know how it's actually writing the code because they don't care. But for the developers that do care, it is writing ECS, and you can easily just plug in and modify the code, write everything in code. You can completely bypass the visual scripting features, and that was one of the key things that we wanted to make sure that we did is show some love for developers, which a lot of systems don't do. They have a specific target for designers, where ours is more of a broad range and even working in larger teams. There's still some thought going into the idea of ECS working with MVVM, because for UI, MVVM is a great model. How they'll work together, I don't really want to say just yet, because I'm not entirely sure. I mean, they are sharing currently the same kernel, and the same event aggregator, so you can easily share events and messages between the two, and that would also work great for if you ever wanted to migrate from one to the other. Since they do share the same model, you can kind of do one half of it in ECS and one half of it in MVVM if you wanted to. I think that might be a little too much overhead to have two different systems working, but if you've got a huge game, it might make sense. But there's still some more thought, in how to approach that and how to recommend our users with using either or. Yeah, I can definitely show you some code. Right now, I haven't done a whole lot with the editable files, but effectively, if you're familiar with MVVM services, that's effectively what a system is. It works. It actually right now is currently deriving from ECS system, and I should probably actually go to my scroller because it's less all over the place. Yeah. So this is the code it's actually writing for you. So effectively, these handlers are the methods where you'll actually plug in. So you won't see all of this. This kind of handles some of the internals and how you're designing it. But where you would kind of plug in is right here on these handlers. Right now, it's just a private protected void. But if you switch it to, hey, I want to do this manually, you'll get a method just like MVVM where you plug into it and you can write your own code. And it already passes me the data and the component. So I can process this however I need to. And I also have access to all of the components of any type. And this is where I'm talking about the API, stuff like this and how this is all going to be finalized is still going under a little bit of scrutiny, but for the most part, it's a working system so far. And I've got my event aggregator. I can do all this stuff. I can override the setup, do basically anything you want to. Or you could completely start from scratch and just create your own system in code. It has that whole framework behind it where you could completely avoid certain things if you want to. So hopefully that answers your question a little bit more. Richard? Yeah, that's what I was saying earlier about the scalability. So that's where these modules come into play. Like the module graph that I have here, and for people who can't see the chat, he's asking about scalability. And effectively, a module is a group of components, events, and systems. I threw way too many components and systems into one graph, so it's probably really confusing. But the idea is to ultimately, keep your systems and your components a lot more separated out than this. So whenever I finish a system, I can ultimately forget about it. It's a running system that works. I can, close the graph and, start a new graph for something new. And that's kind of how the framework and the idea of ECS works anyways. You'll create a system and a component that does something. And as you progress and you iterate, some of those components and some of those systems might fall off the face of the earth, but it's not causing you any project regression, if that makes sense. So ultimately, you'll create a lot of different little modules, and these modules are kind of encapsulated into their own little world, and these modules can become very reusable. So ultimately, one of our ideas is to give you the ability to share these modules so that you can effectively start a new game and say, I want to pull down this module, this module, this module, and this module, and you've already got 90% of your game done. So as far as scalability, there's a lot that can be done to grow this out and separate it between other developers. Don't follow my practice of putting everything in one graph. I just did this because I was running 100 miles an hour trying to get this together. I would follow more of what I've kind of done here. Is I've created a very simple scroll system. I have 2 or 3 components and a single event, and then you have a system that works off of those components. You can even get even more, granular and follow the single responsibility role and create, a single system for every component if you wanted to. I like to create a little group of components that kind of do some of the same things and put those into single systems so I don't have a million systems going on. Well, this talk is more about ECS. I don't really want to go too much into MVVM. Um, Maybe we can do another talk on MVVM and how these two compare. But I really want to keep the two as much separate as possible. And yes, Richard, the entity groups and a lot of different things. Um, it's all reactive. So it's working off various different events to you know keep track of the groups and the entity IDs and all of that kind of stuff. And that's more of the stuff that's being worked on moving forward, is making sure that all of that is there and done properly, and there's no bugs in those areas. But it is a pure reactive system, where you ultimately I listen for let me switch to my game system. I listen for an event, and then I publish an event, and anything in between is any kind of conditions or anything like that for publishing an event. So effectively, if we look at it that way, we're actually creating a reactive system, because it's all based off of events, much like how from a developer standpoint, how reactive extensions works. Yes, right now there actually is observables for each properties when it's generated. And let me pull up my code preview window here. So you can actually see that there is an observable. It's only used when you're actually using it, so there's no overhead for it. And one of the ideas behind this is that actually in these groups you can actually define filters beforehand, where it'll actually subscribe to these properties, and whenever those properties change, rerun through that entity group. So you can actually have groups that have, it's almost like a query, a SQL query, if you will. Yeah, that's kind of the idea. How that's going to be done, I'm not sure yet, because effectively you can do the same thing within here, but you might not be able to reuse that same query somewhere else, like an entity group can. So some thoughts going into that, and I'm definitely open to some feedback once I release the preview build. Yes. The Flatbird, this guy? Is this what you're talking about? I mean, effectively, obviously Unity has some of its built-in components, and we can't like change that code to make it follow, the ECS model. So there is, yes, exactly, like lights, materials, rigid bodies, all that kind of stuff. You've got to provide some kind of custom action for accessing these specific components based off of a component. We'll probably already have those components for you to access the rigid body, or set the gravity and all that kind of stuff. So it kind of keeps that from being in your mind, but it still has to be there. I mean, effectively, the game object is kind of the view, as I've heard many people say. So accessing these components from your systems, or from a component that is an ECS component, isn't really breaking the paradigm. Yeah, and effectively with the action system, here, it's very easy to do whatever. Um, I mean, I could create an action here called, get rigid body. Rigid body. Copy and paste this guy. And we want to take in any kind of mono behavior. Get the rigid body. Now I can switch back over to here as soon as it finishes compiling. And now I can, say after I publish this, I want to get the rigid body. Now all I have to do is pass in a behavior. And all components that it passes you, which is this item, you can connect to behaviors. So now I've got the rigid body. I can do whatever I want with it or anything like that. The preview build, it's available for pre-order on the website. So if you want to join in and help kind of this development process, I do want to say, I wouldn't go like building games because there's going to be some changes for it, and for that reason, we're not going to support it immediately out the door. But it is a functioning system right now. It's kind of use at your own risk at this point. Until we have a little bit more time to get things right and get some feedback. That's the main reason for this. So if you purchase it, it will be available at some point during this week. All right, well, I think I'm done here unless there's any. I'll take one more last question.
One of the questions was like, how does ECS handle visibility inside of Unity? Like how comfortable it is to check for your components and stuff. Because MVVM doesn't expose much information about running views and view models inside of the system. Besides what you have in your kernel where you see like registered views and view models.
I'm not sure what you're talking about.
Well, about how much ECS integrates with Unity Inspector. Well,
it's all in the inspector. I mean, all of my components that I define here, I can add any of these components to a game object. I mean, that's how this whole works. You're basically building a nice set of components that already work with each other and do other things, but ultimately on your game object, you're adding these components and you're creating, a very simple, you're just inputting the data. So whenever you input that data, your systems will work off of those. So whenever these components are created, it registers it and maintains them as if all these components are simply a database table. So all my bird components are going to live in a table called birds or birds manager. So from my systems, I can easily access all of the bird components. I can access all of the reset position on play components, things like that. So it's kind of automatically maintained to make it very efficient during execution. Yeah, this Angry Flappers will be included as a demo project, but again, the reason we're not doing and focusing on documentation up front, it's for those who kind of want to play around with it and get a feel for what it is. Um, I mean, ultimately, to learn this, all you have to do is just look and then look at the code. If I pull up the code preview window, if you want to know the code it's generating, you can click on any node and see all of the code exactly how it will be generated. And even then, just an hour or two of playing around with it, it follows along with Unity pretty well, so it's pretty easy to learn as long as you just kind of look over the angry flappers. And this video will be on YouTube for everyone to see, so you can definitely watch it over and kind of scroll through and pull out what you want. And if you have purchased it, there is an ECS beta thing, so if you do have a question, we can answer it. But again, I wouldn't go building your next big huge project right away with it. Give us at least another month or two to solidify some things and get things right before we just don't want to take you along that process with us if you start a project with us now. Well, cool. Yes, it will. It naturally reacts to data changing, so yes, it will. And just to show you an example of that, I'll go ahead and grab my ground here and I set it to is scrolling to true. Maybe I grabbed the wrong one. Yeah, there it comes. I grabbed the other one. I can make it go faster. That type of stuff. So it's actually running off of the variables. Cool. Well, thanks everyone for joining. I appreciate it. It's a lot of fun kind of getting this out there and giving a little bit more visibility on what's going on with it. So cool. Well, everyone, have a great day. I'm going to actually stop the broadcast now.